Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at Ironhack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. And Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have with us Nisha today. But Nisha, before we take off, are you prepared to engage?
Absolutely.
Let's do this because we have Nisha Lehmann with us today, who is a mobile developer by day and by night is such a staunch advocate for better mental health and a firm believer that the answer to better mental health lies in advancements in gaming and games that are specifically tailored to mental health issues. So yes, yes, and yes. Happy to have you here with us, Nisha. Is there anything we're missing that you want to make sure you mention?
No, I'm just, a superhero in the night trying to make a small difference in the world. So, I think you covered it pretty well. I mean, mental health, I would like to caveat this by saying I'm definitely not a mental health expert. I'm incredibly passionate about the field and the advancements that are being made in mental health. But calling yourself an expert always comes with a level of experience that maybe advanced degrees and things like this, which I don't have. So I just want to make it clear to your listeners that I am an observer in the system. I'm someone who's suffered from mental health issues. I'm someone whose gaming has actually helped, and I'll talk a bit more about that in the podcast later on. But if you're talking about credentials and other types of things, I'm not, like an expert.
Fantastic. Thanks for that clarification. Nowadays, with this whole, credentialing and all that, which is super important, I'm not taking any importance out of it. Mm-hmm. It gets to be even more important to make sure people know sort of where we stand on that field, so to speak. So thanks for that clarification, Nisha. And, we always like to get to know our guests. And we know that maybe a part of your day or of your week might be to listen to this podcast, because you did mention that you have heard the podcast before. So we want to know, in general, what your life looks like. What are the days composed of, or maybe the nights as well, if you're working on your gaming during the nights. We want to be there with you. We want to feel what it feels to be Nisha nowadays.
Well, it's an interesting question. I am a parent of a toddler, in addition to taking on new responsibilities with parenting, having a full-time job. It doesn't leave a lot of time for games, to be perfectly transparent, which is why I think the word gamer for me is like someone who's really dedicated to games, and I'm incredibly passionate about games, the development of games, especially games that can do good. But I don't have a lot of time to just sit and play. I do like to play games just to unwind or to allow my brain to kind of de-stress or decompress after a really hard day. I find myself looking to games more in those more stressful situations, I would say. When I've been up all night because the kid is crying all night, or he's sick, or it really helps to release into the game and to just lose yourself into another experience, which I love, this just immersive qualities that gaming offers you that maybe watching a streaming service or something cannot. And so for me, I'm super interested in the advancement of games and where this industry is going. I think that's, for me, more interesting than the present time playing the games. But no, I definitely play every once in a while. But I wouldn't go to the stretch of calling myself a gamer, because, again, connotates this idea that you're an expert and that you play games often enough to understand, which I definitely don't. So for me, it's a stress mechanism tool, I would say.
Fantastic. So, gamers are people who play games. Mm-hmm. And I think, when the statistics come up and the sort of the profile of the gamer changed, this was many years ago, that they were saying that the profile of the gamers changed. You typically imagined back in the day, so to speak, the gamer was this sort of nerdy guy, usually as well, who was sitting in his mom's basement playing games, video games in particular. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That profile has changed a lot. Especially with mobile games, with the sort of re-edition of board games as well. There's so many people that can call themselves gamers, essentially because we play games.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether it's every day or professionally, so to speak. There's esports athletes, but I don't think most of the people who can call themselves gamers are even close to that level for sure.
Are that traditional definition. No, I fully agree. I think games have become so immersive into our lives, we don't even recognize it anymore. I mean, like, even if you think about just the Words with Friends, or these games that are, for me at least, kind of like automatic. It's okay, I'm going on the train for an hour, so this is what I'm going to do with my time. It's like, for me, I don't even give it a second thought. So I think all of us are gamers on some level. I mean, I think for sure, because I don't know a single person that doesn't have at least one game on their phone, if not multiple, right? But and yeah, I think so. I think that the traditional definition has definitely changed when you think about a gamer. But for me, that perception somehow still exists when you think about that word gamer. For me, it is someone who kind of is sitting in their basement and playing Super Mario Kart or something like that. So that's why, I mean, I wonder what we can do to change the image. But for me, it's, yeah, but I fully agree with you. I think the definition is basically everyone's a gamer. The question is whether you're closeted or not.
Absolutely. I have to agree with that one. So yeah, there you go. We have now a sort of a new definition of gamer.
new old, yeah, something that hopefully replaces the old, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So Nisha, we always like to start with these kinds of questions that get sort of deep into the fact that our guests tend to be amazing, like yourself, do incredible things, and it sometimes seems for the audience that they have it all figured out. So this question has two sides, right? One is to see that we all make mistakes and we all have failures or first attempts in learning, and that it's okay, right? That we learn from them, that we have these experiences, and that they make us better. They make us every time, and that it still happens, right? So we want to know of one of those times, right, where you were trying to do something with games and you didn't manage, basically, and why that happened, where it took you, how you iterated or leaped from one thing to the other. How did that go for you? We want to be there and learn from that experience.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's hard to narrow down one. I feel like failure is a daily part of being a UX designer, or being just in tech generally, right? You're always trying things and seeing if they fall flat on their face and iterating over them. And so I'm fully aligned with this idea that we all have to kind of fall down. How quickly you get up again, how quickly that failure defines you or doesn't define you, I think is really where we're coming from. When it comes to gaming, I'm trying to think of one specific definition. I mean, I don't want to tout too much because I don't want to self-promote too much on this podcast, but there is an app that I developed where we are looking at integrating a library of games that are specific to mental health issues, or specific to struggles that people are going through, issues that might not be in the quote unquote mainstream, let's call it. And it's incredible, the advancements that have been made in this space. And so in playing some of these games, I was trying to create, I think the biggest challenge that I've had is trying to create an experience or an avatar in a game that's going through a mental health issue authentically. Because for me, I find that incredibly difficult, because if you haven't experienced it yourself and you're trying to extrapolate an experience of someone else, and doing that in a way that's honest, doing that in a way that doesn't somehow make a caricature of the mental health issue, or make it seem like it's overblown, or make it seem like it's underwhelming or something like this. I struggle with this daily. I wouldn't even say that this is a struggle that's in the past. It's a constant struggle for me, because we're always looking for games that speak to us in a more raw and a more authentic way, to be able to add to this library, in the hopes that it helps people with these mental health issues really find themselves and appreciate the fact that they have it. And even people who don't have the mental health issue, if they can play a game to try to understand what somebody else is going through, I mean, this is an incredible tool to be able to be used. So the game development for me was already kind of a failure, because I'm terrible at it. I really realized immediately that I needed to outsource this to a real game developer who knew what they were doing, because I tried myself and the game looked like such crap. Really, it was like old school, and I just felt fake when I created it, because again, it's not a mental health issue that I myself was experiencing. So I actually kind of sucked it up. I wouldn't call it a failure necessarily, but I was kind of like, all right, I can't do this. I got to find somebody who's better, who's somebody who really knows how to develop games properly, someone who's done it before. And that was what really stemmed the search for either freelance game developers or other organizations that are working in this area, to be able to forge partnerships and be able to work together. So it's a constant struggle, this, to be honest, because we want to make sure, because with games, it feels like it's kind of delicate, right? You're creating an experience that really needs to be a real one. It needs to speak to people somehow, versus, the more mainstream like Halo or something else where it's kind of more, oh, I'm going to alienate so many of your listeners in this particular moment. But those games are more, for me at least, like mindless, right? You're not playing it to learn something. You're playing it to just escape. You're playing it to, like I said, probably relieve stress or connect with other friends or something like this. But when you're talking about games that are specific to mental health issues, I think it's a completely different ball game, more or less. And it has to be a real experience. And it's something we're working with therapists on to really try to understand the types of experiences people have and how to recreate that in a game in a genuine way.
Amazing. So several things there. Like the first one, it's and that's why I like to start there, is there's sort of a demonization of failure in our culture in general.
Yeah.
And that's bad. That's like a really big risk, especially for people who are trying to do something amazing and new in the world, because the chances of not getting it right, especially the first time, and you as a UX designer, you know this best than anybody else, right?
Yeah.
Getting it right the first time is almost impossible, right? You don't know what you don't know, and that the only way to learn is to try it, test it, see what is wrong, not if it's wrong, but where it's wrong and how you can improve it.
Right.
And this is fundamental to actually get to something really great, right? So that's the first one. And it's really hard because we always feel that, sort of around the world, there's a stigma and all these things. Even saying it feels like, people will think I'm not good enough, right? So I'm always sort of trying to intentionally push it there in that sense of saying, failure, it's fine. We have to go through it to learn and to get better, right? So that's the first thing. And the second one, about alienating people or not, like I think definitely games have different purposes, right? So a game that is created for the purpose of solving or helping solve or helping go through a mental health issue is of course going to be probably a different game from, you mentioned Halo, but you could mention Fortnite. You could mention, I'm playing Ghost of Tsushima.
Yeah.
A beautiful game.
That's a good one.
Beautiful game. Absolutely beautiful. But, probably if you're having any sort of mental health issues, I don't know if it's going to be the best one. Like some of the things that you would say, like, it's sort of calming and peaceful. You're writing sort of poems. They call them haiku. I think in Japanese, but I'm not sure. I don't speak Japanese. But they're like about failure. They're about sort of death, war. So I'm not sure it's going to be necessarily the best experience. Again, I don't know. I'm not a specialist on this. But versus having games that actually do have a target for that, it doesn't mean that the games are not going to be good. Actually, they should be good. They should be entertaining. They should be something that people want to play. And that's where the hard part comes in, right? Because you can either go all, like, it's easy to go all into either of the two, right? Oh, it's a super fun, exciting game that everybody wants to play. Or it's a game that if you play it, it's going to help you, sort of go through mental health issues. But you can have both. And finding that balance is where it's so difficult, I think. Am I right? Am I getting...
Yep, you're absolutely right on. Absolutely right on. And I mean, it's so funny you mentioned this kind of binary look at games, Of course, we create games for different purposes, for entertainment or for immersion or for stress relief, or like I said, addressing a specific mental health issue. And you have these games that are essentially one or the other, as you mentioned, they're kind of either made for your entertainment and then they're super, I would say overloaded, but they're colorful. They're full of incredible graphics. I mean, you can see the UX design, you can see the effort that's been put into really creating this escapist experience, right? And with the mental health games, it's there too, but it's much more purpose driven. It's much more. The one that's coming to mind for me is a game called Before I Forget, which is a really great one if you haven't heard of it, or great for your listeners too, where basically it takes you through the experience of someone who experiences dementia on a daily basis. And so you have a room full of objects, and basically every object is tied to a memory of theirs. And I found it incredibly powerful when I was playing it. But of course, it's much more purpose-driven. It's not meant to bowl you over or necessarily, create this colorful landscape or this new area where you do escape, but in a much different way. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because the parallels between this binary way of thinking about games and how we look at the mental health system is completely correlated. Because in the mental health system, it's like you have a mental health issue or you don't. And if you do, then you see a professional, and that's it. it's like limited to this very small spectrum where, and that's what we need to, I think, bear in mind is the gaming industry, in addition to the mental health system process, whatever you want to call it, it's a spectrum. You can be anywhere on it. And so creating games that are, yes, addressing mental health issues, but in a creative way, or in a way that also gives you this immersive experience where you can maybe it's not healthy for you to continually experience the mental health crisis you're having in a game. Maybe it is more of a therapeutic for you to really just have this escapist experience where you can leave the pain behind you and just do something completely different, write haikus or walk through the forest or whatever that might be, right? So I think we have to also think about games and the mental health system in the same way, in that, we're all multifaceted individuals and we're not defined by one particular thing. And so you're going to fall on the spectrum between these two extremes, and trying to create games that speak to the different points on the spectrum is an ongoing challenge, I would say, but a fun one to undertake, to try to see if you can reach an audience you never thought you could.
Amazing. So many thoughts there. So I don't want to sort of pour through necessarily all of them, but I do want to take a spin on this, because you've been talking about how you sort of look to address these mental health issues through gaming, how you had your experience or first fail in that sense. Actually, is there a way how you approach this? Any sort of process, like, oh, I want to help solve this or that mental health issue. How would you go about it if you were starting from scratch right now?
I mean, for me, the first thing, and it's exactly what happened with this app, was to do the market research. I'm a very data-driven market research mind, I would say. I'm probably the epitome nerd that you were talking about earlier. So I would start with Google searching. I would see what already exists on the market to try to see if either that solution could be repurposed. I think it's because I've been working in tech for as long as I have. Creating something completely fundamentally from scratch is a kind of a rare thing. There's usually some platform or some foundation that already exists, but maybe it's missing the functionality, or it's missing, the different requirements that you are particularly looking for. And it can be, an add-on, or it can be an enhancement down the road, more or less. I mean, that's just my way of thinking. I don't know about that many things that were completely started from scratch, at least not in the last 10 years. So I started with the market research. For me, it's always Googling, trying to find out, okay, I'm looking for a platform that connects me to other people that are struggling with mental health issues, but that completely anonymizes me. I don't want people to know my name, to know my gender, to know my ethnicity, to know I mean, we are just two people struggling from PTSD, or we are two people struggling with substance abuse, or we're two people struggling with imposter syndrome, or whatever it might be. And that's it. That for me, that's the baseline of the conversation, because the conversation changes fundamentally the more you know about someone. That's where the stigma comes in. That's where you can start the judgments, stuff that doesn't help you address your mental health issue. Let's put it that way. So for me, it needed to be completely anonymous, and it needed to be affordable, because right now, if you have a mental health issue and you can't afford to see a therapist, you're just screwed. Sorry, my French, but you're screwed. There's not really a lot in the way of other things you can do that you can actually afford. And therapy is not cheap. It's a long-term commitment. I don't have to say this to your users probably, but it's not for everyone too, right? And forcing everyone into a box for that kind of help makes no sense when you're talking about such a dynamic space. And so I did market research for the first 3 months, and I really took my time, because I thought for sure I must be missing something, right? This for me is not some breakthrough aha idea that is, I had this epiphany moment. I mean, for me, it's like, okay, we have social media platforms that connect us, where we can share videos of cats dancing. We can share videos of ourselves dancing. But when we want to have conversations with each other on a deeper level, where's that, right? Where's the ability to do that in a way that's protecting your identity, in a way that, you can really seek out help, not necessarily from a professional, but from someone else like you, someone else who's going through the same thing. And so for me, most of the projects and the undertakings I've done have come out of a need. You search in the market, you can't find something that meets the requirements. Maybe there's a foundation, but not much more. And so you think, well, that's ridiculous. We live in a society where you have, thousands of choices for just about everything else. why here is there such a lack of options? And so that's really for me what stems the creative process, and trying to think about, okay, well, if this doesn't exist, how can I create it in a way that is efficient, in a way that is helping the most people and getting it out the door as soon as possible too, because obviously we're already behind.
Definitely are. There's so much we can explore, and I think it's kind of in one of those. Have you heard of the infinite game? The games that sort of are never ending in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think this is an infinite game in many ways. I don't think there's a sort of a final solution to health,
No,
mental
no.
health, you name it. I think it's just an evolution of, we solve this problem and we find this new one, right? But it still means that once we solve this problem, people's lives are going to be better, but they're never going to be perfect, and that's fine.
Yep, that's the problem. I mean, it's so different from our physical health, where you can really see the progress of a bone healing, or because you have X-rays, you can see it, right? Whereas with mental health, it's so difficult to diagnose, it's so difficult to recognize, because it's completely invisible, and it can come in the weirdest form you can imagine. It can be something, related to work or related to home, or it's like they all kind of bleed into each other, and then they build on each other to create even more dangerous mental health issues, right? Suicidal thoughts, or like I said, substance abuse related problems, or whatever it is. Trauma is just, it's really the worst because it's so difficult, and no, there's no one experience that is exactly the same as someone else's. But I think you can share a really intimate and common bond with someone else who has been through something similar to this. And that's again where I think gaming is incredibly powerful, because these commonalities have power in them. And if they can be captured in a game that can speak to people, specifically people who have been through this experience, and do it in a way that doesn't shy away from the rawness of the experience, right? The trauma of the experience. It doesn't sugarcoat it. It doesn't make it look like it was something that, it wasn't that big a deal, right? No, it's a big deal if you're going through trauma, and there's no need to brush it under the rug. So if it can be created and captured and portrayed in a way that's genuine to a real experience, I think it could have incredible impact in healing, because it allows you then to essentially experience that emotion or those feelings without necessarily having to relive it, because you're separated from the experience somehow through this avatar, through this kind of platform. And so and the problem with trauma generally is that you constantly feel like you're reliving it. Like you constantly feel like it's happening to you over and over and over again, which is so detrimental for your mental health. And so I think by creating this boundary, this barrier between yourself and an avatar that might be experiencing it, it could be a whole new way to look at the trauma objectively and really assess it and process it in a way that, you're subtracted from the equation somehow. And, again, if you don't have to relive it every time, that's already a huge step forward in better mental health.
Sounds like it. Again, as a non-expert, it sounds
exactly
like a very reasonable way of approaching this whole thing.
Well, thank you.
Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification.
So Nisha, we've been talking about mental health, about gaming and all these things. Would you say that there's some sort of best practice? And again, I want to be as broad as possible here, because there could be so many different things, but whatever you want to go for, a best practice, something that, at least would help in a way that could be related to mental health and gaming.
Yeah. So, a couple of things are coming to mind. Thank you for this question. I think it's so much easier said than done, what I'm about to say. So take it with a grain of salt as well. But I think one of the big things about mental health is it's really difficult to talk about your mental health issue. I think more often than not, it's something we feel like we can ignore and we can push to the back of our minds, and it will go away by itself. And it's so toxic. It creates, even worse festering thoughts. I'm trying to think of an analogy that makes sense. Like, it's almost to me like leaving a wound open because you can't, afford to get it treated somehow, and letting it open, letting it fester, letting it get worse and worse until it becomes so gangrenous that you have to kind of amputate your whole leg, right? I think the best thing we can do is get it out in the open, because the more you internalize these issues, the more it eats at you like a kind of a cancer of some kind. And so talking about these issues with whomever it is, right? And I am not the person to tell you who is the best person to talk to. It could be a therapist, it could be your family, if you have that kind of relationship with your family, it could be your friends, it could be, this peer network where you're talking to others that have experienced something like that, right? But talking to whomever you choose is already a huge step forward in better mental health. And again, it's much easier to say, that's a great thing to do. If you see something, say something. If if you're feeling, experiencing something, talk to someone, than actually doing it. And I know, I understand, because it took me a very, very long time too to come to terms with my own mental health and to be able to talk about it out loud. It's an incredibly difficult first step for a lot of people. And so I really sympathize with people who aren't ready to take it. But where games can play, again, pivotal role if you're more introverted, or if it's something where you can't, you don't feel like you can talk about it with these people, or you don't feel like you should talk about it, because if you talk about it, then it's real somehow, is again experiencing it on your own terms, being able to lose yourself in whatever game speaks to you that helps you cope. For me, games are coping mechanisms. It doesn't necessarily have to be a game that is tailored to the exact mental health issue you have, although that might be an interesting step for you to take to try to experience help in a different way. But, wherever you can, to try to immerse yourself into something where you can get new perspective, you can reevaluate your mental health and do it in a way that's kind of objective, to be able to decide for yourself what's best. And I think that's really, for me, the other main thing is really, not being pushed to see a therapist because that's what everybody's doing or that's what the option is. I think that is so not only unfit for purpose, right? But it's also just reckless, because if you wait until then to see a therapist, if you wait to see a therapist, or you can't afford it, or whatever it is, your mental health issue bowls you over because you have taken no other action, then you're seeing a therapist for an issue that is so much worse than what you started with. And so for me, it really makes no sense to wait, or to have these barriers to entry when it comes to cost, or when it comes to long-term investments into your mental health. You should be able to get started right away in a way that makes sense for you, in a way that's easy. And so that was, again, I'm sorry to tout this again, but that's the reason why the app was created, was to try to just make it a little bit easier for people to get connected and to talk through some of these things, to get them out in the open, and to understand that you're not going to be judged for doing that, because you're talking to other people who have experienced the same thing. And if you're not ready for that step, then games are an incredible way, another credible outlet to be able to experience mental health issues that other people are going through, or experience this escapism without necessarily having to, maybe directly deal with your mental health, or not having to really say anything out loud. So that's where I think games can really be a game changer. Wonk, wonk. But I think that's really where games have a lot of power, because a lot of people are introverted and they're not ready to talk about their mental health. And that should be perfectly acceptable, so long as you have another outlet to be able to experience it.
Amazing. Thank you for that very detailed recommendation. And I think it was recently that we had the Mental Health Day, World Mental Health Day. Am I right?
Indeed, yep. October 10th.
I think it's always timely to talk about these things. Of course, it's even more timely if we recently had the day to, I don't want to say celebrate, but at least, sort of highlight the issue and make sure that it, I don't want to say taken care of, because it's not. Mentioning it doesn't take care of the issue itself, but making sure that it's visibilized, if that word exists.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Making sure that it's visible, making sure that it's prominent. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, with all the difficulties involved and all the possibilities, but of course, making sure that you have an opportunity to talk about it seems to be one of the most prevalent advices in this. And there's many different ways, as Nisha was suggesting. I think there are fantastic alternatives, and we'll be talking about that towards the end, about your app. But before we get into that, I want to get into the recommendations. I would like to know, Nisha, you've heard the podcast, you've heard other people talking. Is there somebody that you would like to listen to as a listener, or as a future guest, of course? Who would that person be?
Wow, that's a tough question, huh? Because there's a lot. I mean, Man, that one is catching me off guard because there's quite a few. I mean, there are a couple of gamers and designers I know that have created just incredible games based on their own experiences that I think would be interesting guests for you. Lisa Ilin is the first one that comes to my mind because she created this incredible game called Vestige. And it's also about grief and loss, especially losing someone like completely unexpectedly, call it. I mean, I guess that's the nature of loss, is that it is kind of unexpected, but this is really almost on a traumatic level, and the avatar is going through different levels. I mean, there's so many. There's so many gamers that are doing incredible work. I'd have to send you a list of them to have on your show. I mean, but also I think it would be interesting if you have the access to be able to talk to the head of EA or to the head of Sony or something like this to really understand where mental health is on the agenda for mainstream games too, because the people who are creating the games that are speaking to mental health are, I mean, they're very niche and they're very bespoke, and they're creating games because they're dealing with their own trauma, more or less. And how to take those experiences and make them mainstream and accessible on the Xbox or on the PlayStation or something like that would be a super interesting conversation. But I don't know if it's anywhere on the spectrum of scope when it comes to what Nintendo, Sony, the big game makers and the big companies are doing. So maybe even have, being able to have the conversations with the big wigs, as they're called in gaming, to be able to understand, how do they feel about mental health? Is it even something that's a blip on the radar when it comes to creating games that can support better mental health? Might be interesting.
Sounds like an amazing recommendation. And let's sort of keep in that area of recommendations. Is there a book that you recommend the engagers? And of course, why would you recommend that book in particular?
Man, it's funny. I listen to most of the books now. So I'm trying to think of like a physical book, and I'm like, oh, but that's an audiobook. That's an audiobook. That's an audiobook.
Audiobooks are books as well.
It's true. I know, but it's like the last time I picked up a physical book. I was just, that's kind of a weird moment. That's a tough one too. I mean, there are so many good ones. I mean, I'm kind of behind when it comes to reading, to be honest. I mean, reading book like Outliers or Blink from Malcolm Gladwell is coming to my mind because they're pretty recent. I read them just recently, even though they came out ages ago. I know I'm way behind on that. So probably your listeners have read them already. But there's so many good ones. Atlas of the Heart is a good one by Brené Brown. She also is a pretty staunch advocate for mental health. And so I like to listen to what she has to say as well, because she's always, pretty genuine when she's talking about her own struggles. And so, yeah, those are the ones that are coming to my mind right away. I mean, I usually go more by the author than the book title themselves. So really anything by Adam Grant or by authors Adam Grant, Malcolm Gladwell, Brené Brown, some of the main people that are speaking to issues that are, let's say, overlooked or misunderstood is the direction I lean.
Amazing. Those seem like very good authors to follow as well. And what would you say in perhaps that mix between mental health and gaming or games? What would you say is your superpower, Nisha?
Staying alive? No. Oh, geez, that's really hard. I don't know. I hate to think about myself as doing anything special because I feel like what I'm doing is just necessary. So, being able to bridge the gap between gaming and mental health is a constant mission for me. I think there's so much potential in the gaming industry to be able to do good. There's potential in every industry to be able to do good, but really in the gaming industry, I see it more specifically when it comes to mental health. I think my let's say ideal superpower, I probably don't even have it yet, but what I'm working toward is really being able to connect people with different experiences to be able to talk about things they wouldn't normally. It's easy to connect with people you already have things in common with. It's already, it's easy to be able to talk superficially or on a high level about things, but to really be able to have deep, meaningful conversations with strangers or with people that share a common experience with you, being able to set up a platform where you're protected to do that. I think that's being able to connect people and share experiences so you can learn from one another and hopefully not repeat the same mistakes over again. For me, that's the superpower I'm working toward. I wouldn't say I have it yet, but I'm hopefully on the road to get there.
Amazing. Working to get that is definitely a worthy pursuit. So, Nisha, what would you say is your favorite game?
Oh, man, I knew you were going to ask me that. It's so hard. It's so hard because I have so many. So I'm really like I love Halo. I love it. I mean, it's one of the games that it's like my go-to thing when I'm having a bad day or full of stress. I really enjoy playing Halo, and it's probably outdated to many of your many of your listeners, but I really enjoy playing Halo because it's also a way to connect with others and escape just whatever you're going through, right? Through really, really immersive, incredibly created landscapes, and I love Halo. It's for me one of my absolute favorites. From a mental health standpoint, I mean, the one game I mentioned a few, and I'm really happy to mention more. I think it would be super interesting for your users. Sorry, is I mentioned already Prestige. I already mentioned. There's another really good one called Florence. If you've never heard of it, that was the one that really put me onto this idea that there could be some real potential here. Florence is an incredibly cute PC game where they go through separation and divorce. So it's a really interesting look at divorce, but again, from this very separated way of viewing the game. So this couple that is devoted to each other, but they end up somehow realizing that they need to separate from each other is again, it's so incredibly rawly created. It's so genuine. And I was crying at the end of this game. That's how, games don't usually evoke that kind of emotion from me, but I was like moved to tears by this game. And I really thought, wow, there's something here. If a game can do that. And again, I don't want to undermine the power of games, but I've never personally had like this retching emotion after a game, like tears or anger or something like this hasn't been pulled out of me in games. But again, now that you see games that are being developed specifically around themes, around topics, around ideas, it's completely natural to me, this idea that, yeah, if you're talking about something hard, you're talking about losing someone, you're talking about separating from the love of your life, you're talking about fertility issues or whatever it might be, all of which have mental health ramifications, right? Of course, it's going to evoke an emotion. You're going to feel sad at the end because this couple couldn't make it work somehow. And the way that it's depicted is just so it's just amazing. So I would really recommend checking some of these games out. There's a blog post on the website that basically outlines a couple of the games that I've recommended based on whatever mental health issues you might be struggling with, or, if you have friends that are struggling with it, maybe pass them on. But I wrote a blog post on thought leadership about the positive impact of gaming, and there are some game recommendations in there too.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. We're running out of time, but of course, before we take off, have your time for any final recommendations where we can find out more about the work that you're doing in this area. And then, of course, we'll say it's game over.
Of course. Well, thank you so much. It's been a really great interview. I was telling Rob before this started, I'm such a fan of this podcast. So I was trying really hard not to fangirl out on this podcast because I think the work that you do and the interviews that you do are so real and relatable. And so I'm just thrilled to be here and to have met you. Yeah, I'm not going to do too much of the spouting, but please follow us if you feel like. Our handle is @confidconvos. The app is called Confidential Conversations. It can be found on the App Store or on Google Play. At the moment, you do have to pay something to download it. We're trying to address this in the next iteration, where we do include a library of games and multimedia and other things, projects that people are working on that are specifically related to mental health. So the app will hopefully be free, but we're still working on how to suss that out. But if please download it and give it a try. We would love your feedback on the setup, how things are working for you, being able to connect with others, being able to have tough conversations with other people like yourself. The website is confidconvos.com. As I mentioned, there's some thought leadership there about the positive impacts of gaming, how games can be used for good, and some gaming recommendations for specific mental health issues, or, just again, really immersive experiences that put you in the shoes of someone else authentically, which I think is already a worthwhile endeavor to be able to play and learn. So feel free to check that out. And yeah, I think it was an amazing experience to be here. Thank you so much, Rob. It was great.
Thank you for coming, Nisha. Excited to have had you. Excited to have all of these recommendations. Having this perspective on this very specific topic as well of, the conjunction of games with something else, which is in this case mental health. And it is a super important topic as well. However, Nisha, as you know, as the engagers know as well, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Engagers, thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast. And I'd like to make a quick question to you. How are you listening to this podcast? If you are doing it through any podcasting app, have you rated? Have you followed? Have you subscribed? Have you made comments on the podcast? Please do so. That way we can reach more engagers, and all of these things are for free to you, absolutely for free. And if you do any and all of those, we can reach more engagers like you to achieve this mission of making learning amazing. If you need instructions, please go to professorgame.com/iTunes, and there you'll have a couple of examples. And before you go on to your next mission, please remember to, even if you're not going to do anything else, please follow or subscribe for free using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.